I'm now going to create some patterns using the automatic region feature, which is the easiest way to create patterns on cones. So we're currently in the model environment. We want to come down to the pattern environment. As soon as I do, you can see that all of my membrane elements got highlighted in that light gray, and that's just telling me that all of my membrane elements are on the same layer. And then we can come into add pattern. But before I do that, I really quickly want to check my patterning setup. So I'm just going to come in and click setup, and then I can see I have my fabric type, I have my roll width information, my seam allowance already entered. I know we've talked about this in earlier videos. I also have all of my seam type data already entered. I simply read this in from a library file. And I've also got the web method for the 2D triangles of my pattern selected. I have it set as perpendicular. I'll go ahead and click OK. We'll click on the add pattern, and this time we're going to use auto region. Now before we get started, to help me see what I'm doing, I'm going to put myself in a better angle, and I'm going to turn off my struts, my beams, and my geodesics. I'll go ahead and I'll leave my cables in because I'm only going to create patterns over a quarter of this structure, and the cables help me divide it up so I know where I want to create my pattern. Let's now briefly talk about the auto region patterning options we have in our right-hand vertical column. First thing, we have the number of patterns. This is simply how many patterns do you want in the region you're going to create. For right now, I'm going to go ahead and say that I want 4 patterns. Iterations, that's simply the number of iterations you want NDN to run through to get your patterns as efficient as possible. I'm also going to go ahead and make this 4 just so you can see NDN run through that process. Next, we have the width diff. This is simply the tolerance in the width differential between each pattern. So for each region, as NDN is running its iterations, once each pattern is within 0.02 meters of each other, NDN will call that complete. Next, we have spacing. Now, this is a default generated by NDN, and we recommend generally that you leave this default set. It'll be different for every model, and this is simply the spacing between the nodes along the perimeter of each pattern. Next, we have weight, and the default is 1, and this means that your node spacing will be evenly distributed across the perimeter of your patterns. For a cone, for example, sometimes it might be beneficial to have your nodes spaced closer together, say up towards the bail ring. So you can change this value to greater than 1 or less than 1 to have your node spacing closer together at one end of your patterns versus the other. So you might want to play around with this and see what works for you if you want to change your node spacing on your patterns. Next, we have adjust width at small end. As NDN is creating patterns, it'll run seams from the small end, the bail ring, out to the large end, the perimeter of your structure. To adjust seams to the proper width, NDN will move, as it does iterations, the seam along the large end. If we check this box, not only will it move the seam along the large end, it will also adjust the seam along the small end. And we generally recommend that you leave this unchecked because this can result in some less than desirable patterns. Next, we have optimized roll width, and if we check this box, this will simply override the number of patterns you have selected, and it will automatically generate as few patterns as possible to cover this region based on your roll width. And I'm going to leave this unchecked for starters, and then next we have simply our warp orientation, and this allows you to select how you would like NDN to apply the warp orientation on your patterns. Longest side is the default, used most of the time. I'm going to leave that set. So let's now go ahead and create some patterns. I'm going to click Next, and now we simply follow the instructions that NDN gives us at the bottom of the screen. I want to select a base seam, which is my starting seam, and as usual, I'll select 2 nodes for a generated seam or 3 nodes for a traced seam. So I'm going to do this quarter of our umbrella here. So I will select my base seam. And again, as NDN says, start from the shorter side. So I'm starting from the shorter side, my bail ring. Select 3 nodes. It lays down my base seam. Now I'll select my ending seam. Do the same thing, 3 nodes. Okay. Now it says select 2 mid nodes to help steer the seams. So I will select 1 node, 2 nodes. As soon as I select this last node, you'll see NDN goes ahead and starts automatically generating and iterating my patterns. Okay, it's running through its iterations, ran through 4 iterations, and it gave me 4 patterns exactly like I selected up here. Okay, those patterns look good. I can click Finish, But now I'm going to real quickly come in here and delete these. Delete patterns all. Okay, they're gone. Let's come back into add pattern, auto region. This time I will still have my number of patterns, 4, but I'm going to select the optimize roll width. So this will tell me if NDN can pattern this region in fewer than 4 patterns or not. We'll find out. Let's click next. Again, I'll follow the same process. Start with my first seam, select 3 nodes, my last seam, select 3 nodes, and then 2 nodes in the middle, starting from the small end going to the large end. All right, there we go. I still had 4 patterns selected, but this time I clicked on optimize roll width, and you saw in the first iteration, it laid down 4 patterns, and then as soon as it did, on its second iteration, it could tell that it can fit this on 3 patterns, so it went ahead and reduced my number of patterns to 3. Okay, I will click finish. If you want to give these a quick review, just click on review. There they are laid out. Okay, click back. And that is how to create patterns using the auto region feature.